Hello there, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series, brought to you by Rethink Dyslexia, the podcast where we're breaking barriers and doing things differently. I'm Shae Wissell, your host, and I'm so glad you can join us. I'm a fellow neurodivergent, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the tribes across our beautiful country and to all First Nations people listening today. Our podcast was born in 2017 out of a need to give a voice to the stories and perspectives of adults with dyslexia. And our voice has grown stronger year after year. We're now a globally listened to podcast with guests from all around the world. Join us for insightful conversations about living with dyslexia and other neurodivergences across all walks of life. Our special focus is on adult education, employment, social and emotional wellbeing, and entrepreneurship. We're excited to be bringing you this episode and invite you to like and follow us, or even better, why not leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Dear Dyslexic podcast show. I am really thrilled to have our guest on today, who is a mentor of mine, but originally I found out about him through my research around dyslexia and the superpower narrative. I found Nigel's work and thought it would be great to introduce myself to him via LinkedIn. And the rest is history, as they say. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
I was fascinated when I came across your work because the term superpower is one that's been thrown around a lot at the moment. And I was interested to see your thoughts around dyslexia and its strengths from a research perspective. But how did you get into the space of research?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a long journey and a long story. So I will chop it up and you can guide me the best way through this. But I think what happened to me, it's a very personal journey that then emerged into a professional story as well. Because I'm dyslexic, and you can tell by my grey hair that I've been dyslexic for a while, all my life, that then actually there became an opportunity as I began to disclose that in professional environments, that gave me the opportunity to really consider about my passion for entrepreneurship and how that might be related to dyslexia. So my own journey is really quite complex, and I would say mirrors many dyslexic people that I know, successful people in their own field, where the dyslexia is interwoven. So they're not separate, part of who we are. I'm not sure where best to start, Shae, so perhaps you could guide me. What would help?
Well, maybe we could come back to this point around identity and dyslexia later, because it's very much talked about with the autistic community, and that identity is part of them. So, or maybe we could start with that. Around how did you find out you were dyslexic?
Well, not till I was an adult. So I was an undisclosed dyslexic. Nobody knew I was. Undiagnosed, maybe that's the right word. So I went through my whole school experience being told that I was thick, lazy, stupid. And I would say that I believed that. So I emerged from education having failed most things, which simply confirmed everyone else's view. So it wasn't till I was 18, 19 that I took a test, which in those days was quite unusual. So we're talking about sort of 1980. And I went to Aston University, which was an early centre for dyslexia. And I took some tests. And I didn't even know what dyslexia was until somebody said, well, you are dyslexic and this is what it means. What I would say is that there was no learning or professional consequence of that because I didn't tell anyone. I kept it a secret until I was in my mid-50s.
Wow, that's a long time to hold it close to your heart.
Yeah.
Did your family know?
Both family knew. So my parents knew, eventually my wife knew, and my children knew. But it was something that we didn't really discuss in a work environment, because at that point, I would say that the legacy was that I thought I was thick, lazy and stupid. And so it was a very negative part of me. And what then changed is that move from realizing it actually was something quite different. And that was the sort of enlightenment for me. It was a long time in the coming, but now I feel completely different about my dyslexia.
And what flipped the switch for you? Did you have any family members that are dyslexic that you know of, or your children?
Well, I think one of my grandfathers was. I knew him a little bit, and he was in the Second World War, and my grandmother used to tell stories about the letters he sent home. He was at Dunkirk and then served right the way through, about how his letters were heavily censored because he misspelt words and people must have thought they were some sort of code. So there was always a narrative around that as a funny story around that, but we didn't call it dyslexia. And so I didn't really know anybody who was successful. Bear in mind that the stories were so negative. It was a disability. And in the UK, there are acts of parliament which protect someone with disability, and dyslexia is on that list. So it's a very negative narrative, not just from a personal perspective, institutionally, educationally in our society, whereas I feel the opposite now.
And so what was your career path like up until you disclosed?
Well, very checkered. So I did eventually, after several attempts, get sufficient qualifications to go to university, where I studied biology. And then almost immediately I went into work not related to biology, and then set up my own business. And this might be the hook that we need later around the connection with entrepreneurship. So I became an entrepreneur. I had no idea of the significance of dyslexia and entrepreneurship at that point. It just seemed the way in which I could exercise my curiosity and passion for solving a problem was to create a new business. So that's what I did. I then did that for a decade plus. And at a particular point in the company's history, I sold effectively the company and realized I didn't know what I was going to do next, and went back to university and did a master's, and then surprisingly stayed on to do a PhD. So I found myself in an environment which was all about words. And as a dyslexic, that was horrifying. And so I suppose I always felt I was a bit an imposter in that environment. And then it wasn't until much later on in my career that I started to disclose. That's my really rapid career path.
So what enticed you to go to university when you'd had such, it sounds like trauma. I don't want to put that word in your mouth, but it sounds like it was traumatizing going through the education system. So why did you want to go to university?
Well, I suppose this may seem strange, but at that moment in time, I really didn't know what to do. I had sold a business. It'd been a very painful exit from the business. So there was a lot around that. I'd got a very young family, 4 children. My youngest was 1 week old. And I think somebody said to me, "Oh, had you thought about going back to university?" I thought, "Well, no, why would I do that?" But what I realized, I was curious about something that I'd noticed in running my own business, is that I could never delegate one thing. So as the company grew from no staff to 100 staff to with 24 million turnover and market leadership, I realized I could never delegate the role of working with the business and IT together. So information systems and business seemed a bit of an unholy alliance. And yet I was fascinated by that. So I actually went to university to study effectively information systems and business because I was fascinated by that. And that probably intellectually was a turning point for me, because I realized the reason I didn't delegate that is because I couldn't find somebody who could understand information systems and understand business and work out how they fitted together. And that shaped me, that shaped quite a bit of my career, that discovery, self-discovery.
It's interesting you say you went back to university because you didn't really know what to do, because that's how I ended up doing my master's too. After my undergraduate, and I was traumatized from my first job. I went back to study.
And it was a different experience, was it, the second time?
The second time, yes, because I was diagnosed during that time with dyslexia. So then I got the accommodations. And also it was public health. So even though I had stats, I had to do stats and epidemiology and failed and had to repeat a couple of times, I was able to grasp the concepts a lot easier. They weren't so scientific compared to speech pathology.
And I would say when I started my PhD, it was about 2000. And technology, I mean, I had worked with technology in business, but technology in terms of personal productivity was changing rapidly. So even by then, we'd got specialist software like ReadWrite and other software that was coming through. But even Microsoft Word had tools in there that could help somebody like myself with spell checker and gram checker, and the ability to edit text before you, and the ability to read it out loud. So now I rely heavily when I'm working with words on assistive technologies, which were not available. So I developed workarounds, which is such a familiar expression for dyslexic people. But yeah, the learning environment had changed, not because I was able to get any concessions, because remember, I wasn't disclosing my dyslexia to anyone, but because technology supported me. And of course, by then I was 40 and I had all the scars of education, but also all the scars of running my own business and being a successful
entrepreneur. We will have to unpack that. Yes, for those who are listening, we are going to have a second follow-up podcast through the Hobo CEO on dyslexia and entrepreneurship. So when we refer to the other one, you'll know what we're talking about, and you can join us for the second in our series of conversations. So when did you disclose then? Was it when you were doing your PhD, did you disclose, or you didn't have any support then either?
No, Shae, this may surprise you. I didn't disclose my dyslexia publicly till I was in my mid-50s. So I'm in my early 60s now. So it's less than 10 years ago. And I decided to do it in a very public way. I felt very secure in who I was in academia. By the time that I made this decision, I was a professor. The reason I became a professor very quickly was because I noticed when I joined academia as a junior lecturer that the people who were making all the decisions were called professors. And I thought, well, that's what I need to be. So I made it my mission to do that, and I very quickly got promotion and through the academic ranks. And I had been a professor at the University of Leeds, a very prestigious university in the UK. And I was at this point at a post at Lancaster University, which is another really good university in the top 10. And I thought, well, I feel really secure in my job. No one's going to fire me, I felt. Reassure you, nobody did fire me. And I thought, I'm going to disclose this because it had been a burden for so long. And so I decided that I would blog once a week as the Dyslexic Professor. And I decided to do it by creating my own website, which I would post my blog on. But of course, there was also LinkedIn. So every week I posted. It was 1/52, 2/52. And what happened is I made that decision not knowing the consequences. So we can talk about those, I'm sure. But that was why I decided. I was almost just fed up with hiding something that I knew was important to my life, but I hadn't really honoured it and understood it.
And that's interesting then to link it to, was it because you saw the strengths of your dyslexia as an entrepreneur that you felt comfortable as well to out to yourself so publicly?
I know. I wonder why I did it now. I don't think it was quite as profound as you might be implying. I think it was much more. I was just a bit irritated with being in an environment where I was clearly successful at what I was at, and I'd been successful in another. And I think it was the notion of failure and not really honouring the failure, and dyslexia was part of my story, not all of it. And I wanted to sort of share that, but also then open that debate, have a discussion. And so not really profound, more very personal.
It's a journey coming out.
Yeah.
I think particularly in academia, because I don't know if I have imposter syndrome, but I say to people that I'm not really academic.
Yeah.
Because I can't write like an academic. I'll never be able to write like an academic. I still get my numbers mixed up. I can't understand it. Like, I can know what a p-value is, but...
Yes. What's interesting, Shae, is that I became successful as an academic by doing all the things that academics had to do. What I would say is I adapted the way in which I did them. So if I had to lecture, as I know, which is standard for a lecturer, senior lecturer, professor, I made sure I was always super prepared. I always had more material than I needed. I knew my subject well. I spoke with passion, and I engaged with my audience. With my academic, to get my promotions, I had to publish in high quality international journals. I worked out the best way to do that was to collaborate with people who had a different skill set to me. And so I brought, well, we may talk about this later, but I brought my own uniqueness, the way I thought about things, but I combined it with people who complemented me in some way. And together we published papers in leading journals. So each time I came across a hurdle, I adapted quickly, worked out how to succeed. And so I ended up delivering good teaching, good papers, and I was a really good manager. And maybe we might come to that good manager bit a little bit later, because I think that's part of the reason I became successful in a second career.
So there are two questions I want to ask. Well, one is, I feel like that's a real strength of dyslexics, is the ability to collaborate and to know where I used to always connect with the IT person and the administrator in jobs, because I know that those two people would be really helpful in helping me with certain things that I knew I would struggle with. So I feel like we're really good at bringing those people together around us to help, whether we disclose or don't. But also, secondary is, did you carry any anxiety or stress that you were going to be found out?
Oh, always. From the day I went to school to the day I disclosed, so that could be 50 years, I was always anxious about being discovered, because to me, being discovered was about being humiliated. I am ever grateful to myself for disclosing, because that just removed the fear of being exposed, because I was out there saying, yeah, this is me. And I think part of how I've been successful is that all of me is part of that, including my dyslexia.
And did you feel that impacted your mental health throughout your career before you disclosed?
I think it affected me, my mental health, but also my cognitive ability became enhanced by that. So what I mean is that I'm really good at scanning environments. The reason I'm good at it is because every new environment, it could be a hostile environment, and I could get caught out. So that response to the fear of failure or disclosure means that I'm really good at going to a new situation, quickly working out the dynamics, working out where the risks are, and then working with others to succeed. So, you could say, well, that's an awful thing to do, but actually it's a really positive thing to do when you find yourself, which you do in work, constantly a bit in new environments. I think disclosing helped me with my mental health, you might say, but I was always afraid and fearful. And I think that, well, of course, I can see the negative of that, but I also realized that it made me more empathic, I think. Whether my dyslexia made me more empathic or my dyslexic experience made me more empathic, there's something about empathy. If you have suffered you find it so much easier to understand what it might be like for someone else who's suffering. And that's a really good skill to have in life, but also in complex organizations.
I feel sometimes that and my husband would debate this because he doesn't see dyslexia as empathic, because my brother and dad lack that skill set to some extent, particularly my dad. I shouldn't pick on my brother, but we're all dyslexic, those. But I feel like it gives you an insight that then sometimes it's hard to shake, because you can feel so much more for people. And when you see a lot of negativity happening in the environment, I feel like it weighs really heavily. So like for me, I can't watch the news at the moment because I just can't start to detach from all of that.
Yeah. No, I understand that.
So, I mean, we've talked about two really great skills. And I think with my research, the people my participants, we talked about, rather than superpower, using that term, but the strengths, and that we couldn't associate, and I agree, couldn't associate with it being because of our dyslexia, but because of what you're saying, the need to scan the environment quickly and work out what was happening so you didn't have to disclose, or the problem solving to get ourselves out of situations, what we're going to do. So that brought those skills into focus, because we constantly practice them, particularly if we haven't disclosed. At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we're helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more, or book your free consultation today.
Yes, I think so. And I suppose I should really explain why I talk about superpower, because I am doing a little bit tongue-in-cheek. So I use the expression dyslexia superpower if I'm talking to other dyslexics, because what I've learned is that many of the successful dyslexics I've spoken to carry with them the baggage of being told that they are stupid or thick and lazy. It comes up very early on in the conversation, the trauma you described of being told as a young child that you're not as good as everyone else and feeling that. So when I say it's a superpower, I'm sort of doing it as a joke to other dyslexics, because we know we don't actually have a superpower. We've actually got a learning difference that means that we find it very hard to process words. So yes, let's be honest about that, but also let's not forget that we have other skills, cognitive abilities, adaptations, whatever you want to call them, which means we can do things differently that other people can't do as well. So that's why I say dyslexia superpower, almost as a little bit of a joke to say, yeah, we're not just thick, lazy and stupid. We've also got these really enhanced skills. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about what I can do that might be an advantage to your organization, your challenge, your opportunity? Because, yeah, we know all about the other side.
We definitely do know about the other side. How do you think we can encourage organizations to move beyond, because I mean, literacy and numeracy difficulties are so evident, they're in your face, where if someone's autistic and they don't look at you, you may not really register as such, or so the mistakes we make are really visible on paper. So how do you think we can help organizations move beyond that to see these abilities that we can have due to adversity?
Yeah, I think the answer is simple and complex. So the simple bit of the answer is that organizations that can do this will perform better than those that don't. So if you are running a large organization and you want to improve the environment, be more competitive, resolve big issues, if you can harness the power of your neurodiverse community that you've got, that you probably don't even know you've got, then you will succeed in a way that others don't. So it's in your interest, if you're running a large organization, to really nail this, to understand it, to put in the adaptations that support your staff, and to start working differently. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a complex challenge, you need to bring in the full breadth of your cognitive power. That means you need to engage your autistic, fine detail staff, you need to engage your dyslexic, big picture thinking staff, and everyone in between in that challenge, because the more diverse your cognitive group is cognitively, the quicker you will find solutions, the better those solutions will be, and the faster you can implement them. To me, there's a massive advantage to organizations in doing this. And the enlightened ones know that, and they will be moving ahead.
We are in such a fast-paced environment now, and it's changing so quickly. And it's interesting to see some of the work that's come out made by Dyslexia around the emotional intelligence and problem-solving skills that AI can't replace, those soft skills that we seem to have strengths in that AI can't replace for now, and that more and more organisations will need as we transition into this new era that we're looking at.
Yes, I think you're right. So if I were to think very personally about what strengths has my dyslexia brought me, if I had to choose one, and I think there are many, the one I would choose, I would call it big picture thinking. And what I mean by that is I can go into very difficult environments, really complex, dynamic, maybe even hostile, and I can very quickly gather in my head an image of what that's like. And I don't just mean physical objects, I mean personalities, information systems, external threats, external opportunities. And what I've noticed is I can do that very quickly, and then I can articulate that to the people around me. Now, if you are working in a team where not many people have that ability, that can be really powerful for the other team members, because I'm translating this environment, this problem, this opportunity in a way that others can then engage with it. And they've got skills I don't have. They might have really good analytical skills. They might have good organizational skills. They might have good expertise. Suddenly, what's happening is we're harnessing that. So it's not really my solution. It's a collaborative solution, but it's been brought about or enhanced by the fact that I've been able to translate that complexity in a way that others can understand. And I've seen that happen in so many different environments that I'm now convinced that that's part of my advantage.
Of a workplace where you've been able to bring a group of people together to successfully implement a project.
Yes. Give an example without naming the university. So just to protect the innocent. So I worked in a university where I ran a very big department. It was one of the biggest departments in the university. It had 70 academics in it, and it was big. And it was failing. Apart from one or two measures, it was failing. But the main thing it was doing was losing money. So, that's important because it was losing so much money, it was putting at risk the faculty it was in. So the faculty could have gone into what we would call special measures, where the dean no longer has control because the administrators are in trying to sort out. So it became really important that this was resolved. And it took me 3 years to do it. But we moved from a loss-making group of academics who didn't really understand what they shared. They knew their differences, but they didn't know what they shared. They had no clear strategy or vision, and they were losing money because students were not taking their courses, because they couldn't articulate why the student should. And we turned that around in 3 years, and we did that so that there were more students coming in, there was a greater sense of purpose, there was a shared vision, and there were lots of different activities that contributed and aligned to that vision that we created. So I would say that came about because I was able to articulate to the 70 people what the problem was, what the opportunity was, and what a number of the solutions might be. And then we collectively agreed on what our position was. And then they gave me permission to lead the group and to organize the group in a different way. And as a result of that, the whole thing turned.
It's a really good example. Did you find that, like, sometimes I feel like because I'm big picture and I can kind of see the end result, that sometimes it's hard to explain because I don't want to know the detail. And I find the detail really hard to not grasp, but I find it actually a bit boring. I don't want to know the detail. I just know that I can get us to this point. Don't worry about the detail. We'll get there. But that doesn't work for some people.
Yeah, maybe it brings me back to something I said earlier, which is, you remember I said that in order to succeed, I had to write academic papers, which needed to be published in what we would call 3- and 4-star journals. And I realized that the way to do that was to collaborate. Well, the way to run an academic department, the way to run a business is to collaborate. So I would say that collaboration was the thing that really mattered. So it wasn't in the end about me, it was about the team. And what the thing that I loved about running things, because that became my real joy, was working with lots of people from different backgrounds, different abilities, different genders, all sorts of differences. It became something that was just part of the delight of doing my job, was creating diverse teams across all dimensions and focusing in. So that meant that whilst I might be doing big picture thinking, someone else would be doing fine detail thinking. And I'd think, my goodness, there's no way I could do that. Thank goodness you're on my team.
Yes, you definitely, my husband keeps saying that we're all neurodivergent, and that's not diverse thinking on my team at the moment. And he's very right. We are diverse in thought, but we can group think.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I've worked in environments where, let's look at another type of diversity. So I'm really interested in cognitive diversity, neurodiversity, but what if we look at it in terms of gender? So I've worked in many environments where I've gone into that environment and men have dominated. Well, men of a certain type, and they are just like me. They're white, they're grey-haired, and they're male. And I'm not knocking those people. I'm one of them, and I like myself, so that's okay. But what I realized is that wasn't good organizationally. To have that narrow focus, to have that myopic view, was benefiting nobody except the people I've just described. So I always set about in saying, let's open this out. And the first thing I would do was to address gender. So I would move, and in the space of a few years, I'd move from a male-dominated senior management team in a department which was male-dominated into one where the senior team was diverse. There was a level of balance. There was different voices, different genders, and that reflected all the way through. And one of the things I did to achieve that, I would say two things. One is I said, I'm really interested in this. I think we make better decisions as diverse. So I nailed my flag to the mast. And the other thing I did is I started to measure. So I simply said at a staff meeting, here's our department. I've split the department by gender. I split the department by roles. And I've now got some analysis on these grades on what the salary difference is between men and women. I said, I'm not telling you what we have to do. I'm just saying, isn't this interesting? And I left it there for everyone to read, and then we moved on to the next item. 3 months later, I'd put the same slide up and I would say, isn't it interesting how this has changed? And what was happening is all the time, the differences were getting smaller and the diversity was getting broader.
For all those managers listening, we've solved your problem. Though, as my company is a women-led, all neurodivergence, we definitely need a bit more diversity. I might have to do something on the wall as well, bring up some slides saying, we've got a bit of work to do, which is very rare. It is very rare to come across I think it's also the industry we're in where at the moment it's women dominated anyway, if you think of coaching and kind of that type of work at the moment.
I think the issue might be not just in your industry, but many, is the roles and the seniority and the decision making. Who's doing that? And I've noticed in many organizations I've worked in that it's often there's a gender imbalance gets worse as you move up the hierarchy. And I think for me, that's intolerable and needs to be addressed. And if we're going to really embrace diversity, the most obvious one is around gender, but there are others. You and I are talking about neurodiversity, but there's cultural diversity, there's ethnic diversity, there's religious diversity. All of these things, I would just say, the more diverse you can make your team, the stronger it will be and the better decisions it will make. What organization shouldn't want that? I mean, it's just counterintuitive not to.
And I think we're in a really exciting time where we've got such a global workforce. Some of our team are in America. We've got Judith in Wales. We're split all around the world at the moment because of our ability to work the way we do. So there's even more enablers to be creating that diversity that you're talking about.
Definitely.
So I'm going to bring us around full circle to when you ousted yourself, so publicly, on LinkedIn and through your blog. What was the response like from your colleagues? Were they shocked or did they have an inkling?
No, I would say everyone was surprised, but everyone I spoke to was supportive. And what was fascinating, I had not anticipated this. So I was being contacted by people who are successful saying, "Oh, Nigel, I'm so glad you're doing this. I would never do this in my organization, but I really appreciate it. Do you want to meet for a coffee? Can we have a Zoom call?" Or whatever the equivalent was. So I started meeting successful dyslexics in law, in business, in universities. I also had colleagues who would say, "Oh, Nigel, I'm so glad you've done this because my child is dyslexic. And we've been really worrying about it because we saw all the negatives. We were told all the negatives. We didn't realize it was a superpower." Smile on our faces. Yeah. So that was really what happened, is that a lot of support. I felt more and more confident. And the other thing I was doing is that I was reading each week because I had to make a blog up. So I had to find something to talk about. And some of it would be about what was happening at work. Others would be what about I've just read or somebody I've just met. So what was happening is I was in the disclosure, I was learning more and more about dyslexia. And I went from thinking I've got dyslexia, it's a disability, to wait a minute, maybe it's a learning difference. Oh, wait a minute. No. It's a learning advantage. So in that year, I pivoted from feeling that, I was thick, lazy, lame, and a failure to realizing that part of the reason I was successful in these environments was because of my dyslexia, not despite my dyslexia.
And it's interesting you say failings when you had a company that was turning over millions, lots and lots of millions of dollars. So that if my business was turning over millions of dollars, I would see that as successful and me being successful.
Yeah. I think because the educational system ingrained in me that I was a failure and stupid. And I don't think I will ever overcome that, really. So that trauma is there. It's what I do with that. And what I do now is I say, yes, it happened, it's with me, but actually there is so much more that I can bring. And I suppose it's age. I mean, there are lots of disadvantages of getting older, but one of the advantages is that things repeat themselves and more people telling you, oh, wow, that's so helpful. Oh, that's really good. Thank you for doing this. We want you to join our organization. We've heard about you. But you begin to realize that it's not all doom and gloom. Actually, there is lots of light at the end of the tunnel, and actually you're through the tunnel now.
And do you feel, is there any regret or sadness that you didn't talk about it sooner publicly? Or do you think it was the right time and the right space for you?
I think I was too afraid before. So it's difficult for me to imagine being at that level of confidence to do that. I do really admire younger people who disclose earlier. I also respect those who have never disclosed. And so I remember meeting a really top lawyer who said, I'm never going to disclose because nobody in my practice knows I'm really good at this particular thing. If I disclose that, I may not be able to stay in the firm, or they might not feel they can charge me out at the same rate. So they were never going to disclose. So I'd also respect that. But I'm glad I did it. That's the main thing, I think, Shae, is that I'm glad I did it. And so many positive things have happened as a result. And mainly, I have met more and more dyslexic people like yourself who are doing amazing things. And of course, I can appreciate that, but also I can take a little bit of that in and say, wow, oh, well, if Shae can do it, I can do it. It becomes a very reinforcing narrative.
To wrap up, because I think we've covered so many things, disclosure is such a hard topic for people. But do you think there's anything in the workplace or anything we can do as kind of leaders in this space that could support and encourage people to not live in the shadows? Do you think there'll be a time when it will be okay for the top lawyer in the top firm to come out and say, this is me too?
Wow, that's a really complex question
to wrap up with.
Well, yes, but I think what I would say, I would go back to what we were talking about earlier. I think successful organizations will need to do this. So I think that's a good news story that will travel. So when we hear about a success story, the fact that somebody might say, well, part of the reason we were successful is that we had really got a diverse team and we'd embraced diversity, including neurodiversity. And the reason we did that is that we made quicker, better decisions. And that's why we're successful. I think that's a good news story that will spread. And you'd really have to have a very good reason as a leader not to embrace that philosophy, because that means you're doomed not to do as well as your competitors, or as a government not to address those things. And once you make that decision, you have to look at your whole organization. I'll give you one example. If you were going to get a job in the UK government, the civil service, they recruit from the top universities and they have a accelerated graduate program. So they go to the top universities and they look for the top students. And those top students have had the top A-level results to get to university. And they've probably gone to very good schools. You've immediately deselected most of the dyslexic people in the population by doing that. So if you're going to run a successful government department, you need to look at your recruitment and say, what are we doing? We're discriminating against autistic and dyslexic people, not because we're actually actively excluding them. It's that we're picking people who, in order for me to measure their success, can't be dyslexic and autistic because they won't be on our radar. Well, you've got to sort that out. Otherwise, your government is not going to deliver those progressive policies your population need if you're going to get re-elected.
Well, I think that's a really positive note to finish on. And I've loved this conversation and I'm really excited that we're going to have a second follow-up conversation now on entrepreneurship. But I think there's some real gems in what we've discussed tonight on a broad range of topics. So thank you so much, Nigel, for coming and sharing your story with us and our listeners. I really, really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
If you haven't done so already, Make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening and bye for now.